to get out in front of this and, tried to persuade Netflix not to come forward with it. I think it's an interesting argument because what they're claiming is, Curtis Jackson, aka 50 Cent, has had a long-standing, animosity against Diddy and sort of vice versa. And because he's at the helm, they're arguing this can't be taken seriously. This should sort of be seen as propaganda. And one of the things that Netflix hit back with was, yes, he's the executive producer. He doesn't necessarily have creative control. And that's
a distorted, crackling voice emerges from a prison cell, carrying secrets that were meant to remain buried forever. Outside, the world thought that the infamous music mogul, Damian Combs, had been neutralized, silenced by the rigid walls of Fort Dix Correctional Facility. But the audio leaking now tells a different story, one of reach and influence extending far beyond the library chapel where he now spends his days. A conversation intended to be private, laced with cryptic warnings and bizarre code words, worm food, vitamin E, special K serum, is now the centerpiece of a documentary that threatens to rewrite the narrative of his empire. Combs, once a towering figure in the music world, had personally hired a videographer to chronicle his comeback, believing the camera could shield him from the unfolding storm. Instead, every frame captured not only his attempts at control, but also his legal vulnerabilities. The footage now fuels a high-stakes legal battle, a war of cease and desist orders that pits him against a streaming giant eager to air the story. In one chilling segment, the audio records Combs threatening an associate with a dark hypothetical. If I could reach Shakur, what do you think might happen to you? The threat lingers in the air, a reminder that power in his world was measured not just in dollars, but in fear. Outside the prison walls, family members and staff are struggling. Dinner money disputes, missed payments to employees, and the looming threat of asset forfeiture paint a starkly different reality than the public image of a mogul still calling the shots from behind bars. Every carefully constructed illusion is unraveling. The empire, built over decades, is not merely crumbling, it is being dismantled piece by piece. And yet, the most damning revelations remain unseen, poised to hit the world in the next wave of leaks. In the shadows of Fort Dix, Combs' influence still casts a long, dark silhouette.
Got this new audio from the Diddy trial, and it is pretty explosive. This is audio of a voicemail that Diddy left to the Jane Doe who's been testifying in this trial for the last couple days. And he sounds really annoyed. He's talking about her maybe giving him the silent treatment, and his response is, I got a busy life. I can't be dealing with your silent treatment.
The quality of the prison recording is poor, garbled, compressed, full of static, yet the voice is unmistakable. It is a voice that once commanded boardrooms, recording studios, and private gatherings, now reduced to whispers transmitted through a receiver. In the Chapel Media Library, Combs runs a modest program for fellow inmates, distributing films and religious materials, all while the outside world believes he has been stripped of power. But this recording tells a different story. The man is not broken. He speaks with intention, weaving a bizarre theatrical lexicon into his warnings, prompting analysts to pore over every phrase for hidden meanings. Terms like worm food, vitamin E, and special K serum aren't casual references. Observers online speculate they are coded directives to loyalists, instructions meant to be interpreted and executed beyond the prison walls. Every syllable exudes confidence, a tacit reminder that Combs still perceives himself in control. Even as attorneys scramble to suppress the documentary footage, the disconnect between his current reality, the humdrum routine of prison life, and his voice of authority creates a chilling tension. It's unclear whether this is delusion or strategic calculation, but the message is unmistakable. He believes he retains leverage. The video footage, originally intended to protect his image, has become the opposite, a tool that exposes vulnerabilities and amplifies public scrutiny. Conversations with his lead counsel, once confidential, now form the backbone of the documentary's narrative. Discussions of legal strategies, predictions, and media manipulation have been captured for an audience far beyond what Combs anticipated. Legal experts note that by allowing a videographer into these sensitive sessions, privilege may have been inadvertently waived. What was meant to shield him is now the weapon that threatens to destroy the narrative he spent decades controlling. The documentary, retitled The Reckoning, was executive produced by a longtime rival. Within days of release, it shot to the top of the streaming charts. The footage's impact is immediate. Combs is forced into a frantic legal response, yet the streaming platform maintains silence on how the material was obtained. Industry insiders are left asking the same question: who betrayed him and why? The tension between public perception, private knowledge, and legal maneuvering sets the stage for a conflict that is as psychological as it is procedural.
to say because there's still such a big question mark in the air because, Curtis Jackson, aka 50 Cent, is one of the executive producers on the series. Him, the director, Netflix in general is not saying where they got this footage, only that it was obtained legally. Diddy's side is saying this is coming from a videographer I hired. I know we'll get into the cease and desist. One of the arguments they make is, this is subject to NDAs or agreements that the videographer had signed with Diddy because he was, employed by Diddy.
The decay within Combs' empire did not begin with indictments or public scrutiny. Instead, it traces back to the very foundation of the enterprise, built on settlements, silenced critics, and controlled narratives. Kirk Burroughs' story exemplifies a recurring theme: the ruthless removal of anyone perceived as a threat. Burroughs alleges he was cast aside, left homeless while the empire he helped construct flourished. For decades, insiders whispered about this pattern, a system where calculated coercion, intimidation, and strategic maneuvering maintained both profit and control. When viewed alongside the Steve Otis lawsuit, a coherent portrait emerges. Otis claims Combs invoked a high-profile assassination to silence him, suggesting that intimidation was a normalized tactic rather than an extraordinary measure. These legal and civil narratives intersect with historical tragedies indirectly linked to Combs' events, like the 1991 stampede at a basketball game where 9 lives were lost. Though no criminal charges arose from that incident, civil lawsuits and public scrutiny established a pattern. Catastrophic events followed, yet Combs often remained insulated, protected by influence, strategy, and the perception of power. What stands out is the consistency of behavior. Across decades, from early disputes to present-day litigation, a central theme emerges. Leverage and influence were cultivated deliberately, maintained through fear, and deployed strategically. The empire, built on talent and opportunity, was also reinforced by control of information, intimidation, and meticulous planning. Even in scenarios where legal consequences were absent, the perception of authority and potential for retaliation ensured that Combs retained an upper hand. The interplay between public success and private coercion underscores the complexity of influence. Observers note that Combs' ability to walk away from crises unscathed, even when surrounded by chaos, reflects a calculated mastery of optics, narrative, and relational dynamics. His history demonstrates that raw power alone is insufficient. The careful orchestration of perception and control is equally crucial. Civil lawsuits, leaked recordings, and public scrutiny now illuminate what had long operated in the shadows. In Part 13, the audience is reminded that legacy and influence are not static. Combs' actions, whether coercive, strategic, or opportunistic, created an ecosystem where loyalty, fear, and opportunism intertwined. The consequences of this approach are now manifesting in a combination of legal battles, media exposure, and financial scrutiny. It is a test of resilience, strategy, and perception. Ultimately, this section emphasizes that the man at the center has always operated on a complex calculus of power. Catastrophe follows, yet he historically emerged relatively unscathed. The narrative is one of both brilliance and moral ambiguity. The orchestration of influence, the careful manipulation of loyalty, and the strategic deployment of fear converge to create a formidable, if controversial, legacy.
To engage in all these freak-offs with him, and he sounds really pissed off.
Hey, I really don't know what's going on with you, but I just want to just give you a heads up that I'm about to really disappear on you. You feel me? I'm not going to be playing these games with you at all, at all. So I don't know, you think you silent treating me, and you think I'm going to be, nah, you'll have a rude awakening.
Perhaps the most unnerving question concerns what Combs might still possess. Those cryptic references in the prison call, the veiled mentions of worm food, and the implication of safeguarded materials suggest decades of collected insurance, evidence, recordings, or documentation intended to secure leverage. In the entertainment industry, where image is paramount, the individual who holds secrets holds considerable power. The balance of authority shifts when secrets are concentrated in a single, even incarcerated, individual. Financial strangulation amplifies this tension. Firms like TriStar manage funds tightly, lawyers work on promises rather than contracts, and family members face bureaucratic obstacles even for small allowances. This controlled dismantling signals a strategic attempt to weaken Combs, ensuring that he cannot fully mobilize resources even if he retains leverage. The documentary and prison recordings serve as initial and secondary waves, revealing vulnerability while also signaling potential countermeasures. Observers are left weighing whether he is bluffing or whether these materials represent genuine threats. The continued engagement of Combs is critical to understanding his influence. The perception that he may act, that secrets exist, and that retaliation is possible sustains attention and caution. Those within his orbit must decide whether to act or remain compliant, and outsiders must evaluate the credibility of these veiled threats. This delicate tension between capability and perception defines much of the current narrative. Influence is no longer guaranteed by physical presence, wealth, or public power, but by the belief in potential consequences. The unfolding story underscores the precariousness of power. Even when constrained, strategic signaling, coded communication, and selective information release can maintain relevance and influence. Combs' approach blends desperation, calculation, and psychological manipulation, illustrating the enduring potency of reputation and perception. Whether these tools will be sufficient to alter outcomes remains uncertain, but their deployment demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of influence in extreme circumstances. Ultimately, Part 14 closes with lingering uncertainty. The man who once controlled narratives on a global scale is confined, financially constrained, and legally imperiled. Yet he continues to wield a form of influence that relies on belief, fear, and the uncertainty of others. The story is far from over. The next leak, disclosure, or revelation could shift dynamics, redefine loyalties, and alter the trajectory of power. Audiences are left contemplating the fragile boundary between perception and reality, influence and impotence, survival and collapse.
Following breaking news out of New York City, the jury in the Sean Diddy Combs racketeering conspiracy and trafficking trial has reached a verdict on 4 of the
references to a high-profile past incident, long rumored but never legally tied to Combs, are particularly jarring. Interviews with former associates and detailed confessions from other individuals suggest that his influence extended into areas most feared and few dared question. As legal counsel weighs the possibility of Combs being called as a witness, the implications grow staggering. A refusal to testify could cast doubt on his credibility, while testimony inconsistent with prior statements could devastate his position. Even as prosecutors have not charged him in relation to past incidents, the mere potential for subpoenas or testimony reshapes the landscape. The man fighting to preserve his freedom now faces a scenario where the past may reach forward to complicate the present. The intersection of legacy, fear, and legal scrutiny forms a high-stakes theater where every action is measured and every omission could carry consequences. In this context, the audio recording assumes a new gravity. It is not merely evidence. It is strategy, leverage, and psychological warfare all in one. Financial pressures add another layer of complexity. Sources reveal that Combs' assets are now tightly controlled by an external management firm, limiting cash flow and complicating support for family and staff. Employees report delayed payments, and at least one attorney has resigned over lack of compensation. Even simple requests, like dinner money for family visits, require bureaucratic approvals, emphasizing the contrast between past opulence and current restriction. The empire that once helicoptered between business meetings and global ventures now faces micromanagement by court-appointed overseers. Forbes' estimates, while speculative, illustrate a staggering decline from the height of his fortune. Each legal motion, asset seizure, and pending lawsuit chips away at the myth of invincibility. Properties, jets, and stakes in major enterprises are all potential targets of aggressive forfeiture, a clear signal that the rules of engagement have changed. The mogul who once controlled his world with an iron fist is now navigating a landscape of diminished resources, legal entanglements, and public scrutiny.
The flight where Diddy said to her,
showed her
he
the video,
testified
showed her the
that
freak-off video.
he showed her a video of a freak-off that she participated in and said, if you don't participate in another freak-off when we get to New York, I'm gonna put this video out. I'm gonna send it to your mother.
And that's coercion.
She testified
if it's true.
to that.
If the jury
if they believed her,
yeah,
that's coercion.
The tone of the prison call itself carries a mixture of urgency, authority, and subtle manipulation. Despite circumstances that would crush a less disciplined individual, Combs speaks with the energy of someone who believes his role in ongoing events remains significant. His references to films like Eyes Wide Shut, along with specific observations about actors and materials, suggest a strategy that is not fully revealed. He is asserting a form of control through careful curation of information, signaling to those outside that he remains engaged and capable of influencing outcomes. The danger for Combs lies in the passage of time. The longer he remains confined, the more diluted his leverage becomes. Allies may move on, threats may lose potency, and adversaries may recalibrate strategies in his absence. Yet, the recordings indicate persistent engagement. Strategic warnings, coded instructions, and veiled threats continue to ripple outward. This is a form of psychological warfare, leveraging the perception of influence to maintain relevance. By making these communications public, or by ensuring they are discovered, he reminds observers that, even constrained, he retains potential power. Legal pressures compound the tension. Asset forfeiture proceedings threatened to strip Combs of the financial resources that once facilitated his expansive influence. Potential testimony requirements in unrelated cases add further stress, forcing him to navigate complex legal terrain while isolated. Time becomes an adversary. As procedural wheels turn, every delayed decision and unprotected asset diminishes his ability to act decisively. The recordings, therefore, are not merely informative. They are strategic, signaling to both friends and rivals that he remains capable of maneuvering in a world that increasingly excludes him. Every word carries multiple meanings. Analysts note that the coded phrases, seemingly innocuous references, and deliberate obfuscations are consistent with long-term strategies used to maintain psychological leverage. Even minor communications are imbued with significance, reinforcing both fear and respect in equal measure. In this way, Part 12 underscores the interplay between perception and reality. Combs' actual power may be waning, but the belief in his potential to act sustains a level of influence disproportionate to his constrained circumstances. Ultimately, Part 12 illuminates the paradox of constrained authority. The physical limitations imposed by incarceration do not fully negate the strategic value of reputation, secrecy, or psychological influence. Combs demonstrates mastery over this dynamic, blending desperation with calculation, uncertainty with control, and isolation with strategic communication. The audience is left with a central question. In a world where perception often outweighs reality, how much power does a man truly retain when everyone believes he may still hold the keys to disruption?
The judge didn't go into not really the judge, the government didn't go into too many details about the extent of the plea offer, but one thing that they had said was pretty much that under the plea offer, he would be facing less time than he's facing if he would have gone to trial. So when the allocution portion came, Diddy stood up, the judge kind of read him everything that he had needed to read to him, just about whether...
Questions now swirl around Combs' capacity to mount a comeback. Observers wonder whether he possesses the resources, allies, and strategic acumen necessary to survive the relentless pressure encroaching on all sides. His legal team, led by Mark Agnifilo, now represents an array of high-profile clients, including individuals facing extreme scrutiny. The composition of this defense team has inspired grim humor, a lineup reminiscent of Lawyers for the Condemned, people whose reputations are entangled in battles against powerful forces. Agnifilo's roster reflects the scale of the crises and the complexity of managing public and legal perception simultaneously. Meanwhile, the flow of money to Combs' family and staff has slowed to a near halt. Publicist statements claim that all employees are receiving compensation, yet independent reports and insider accounts suggest otherwise. Lawyers reportedly work on deferred payments, staff resignations are rising, and family members face bureaucratic hurdles for basic allowances. The contradiction between official statements and observed reality reveals an empire hollowed out from within. The lavish image cultivated over decades contrasts starkly with the financial and logistical struggles occurring behind the scenes. Amid this chaos, the prison call becomes a central focus. References to worm food, samples, and coded messages may represent the last remaining leverage Combs possesses. While much of the world views him as cornered, these communications imply access to sensitive material capable of inflicting consequences on associates, adversaries, or competitors. The strategy is simple: maintain influence by demonstrating the potential cost of betrayal. But for this tactic to succeed, loyalty must remain intact. The recorded calls suggest he is attempting to signal allies outside the prison walls, testing whether his networks are still functional, whether individuals will act on his behalf if he directs them. Analysts argue that Combs is playing a high-stakes psychological game. His aura of menace is sustained not by direct action, but by the perception of potential damage. Every cryptic message reinforces the idea that while he may be physically constrained, his reach is far from diminished. The implication is as chilling as it is calculated. Even in confinement, he may retain the power to shape outcomes, sway decisions, and instill fear. The prison call represents a last-ditch effort to assert authority, to convert perception into leverage, and to retain control over a world increasingly indifferent to his existence. The narrative that emerges is that of a man attempting to navigate collapse while preserving power. His past successes, cunning strategies, and cultivated relationships contrast starkly with present vulnerabilities, financial, legal, and social. The question becomes whether his influence is enduring or whether the empire built on perception will crumble entirely. Observers watch closely as the delicate interplay of fear, loyalty, and strategic signaling unfolds, creating an unfolding drama where every word, gesture, and decision carries weight. Ultimately, reveals a man confronting the stark reality of diminished resources while exploiting every psychological and strategic advantage remaining to him. His resilience is evident, but so too is the fragility of his position. The game has shifted from overt dominance to subtle manipulation, leveraging uncertainty and exploiting the edges of human behavior. In this environment, perception is power, and Combs' mastery of that principle may determine whether he survives the storm or becomes a cautionary tale of empire lost.
We needed to show that there was an agreement, that the organization knew what it was doing, that it was an enterprise, not in law, but in fact, that people understood the object of the enterprise, which was to promote Sean Combs and his brands and sort of fulfill any deviant desires he may have had, and then to cover up any crimes committed over the course of fulfilling those.
Despite the isolation, Combs' voice from the prison recording suggests an undiminished sense of purpose. He speaks as someone convinced he still has a role to play, a presence that extends beyond the confines of Fort Dix. References to films, surveillance awareness, and safeguarding materials indicate a strategy not yet fully revealed. Observers note that these details are deliberate. Combs seeks to maintain control over how events unfold, even as legal, financial, and social constraints tighten. The longer he remains incarcerated, the less leverage he retains. Associates may move on, secrets may lose value, and the calculated threats may be rendered impotent. Yet the recordings demonstrate continued engagement. Warnings, instructions, and subtle signaling persist. The psychological element is significant. Maintaining the illusion of reach ensures that observers outside remain cautious, hesitant to act without evaluating potential consequences. Legal machinery continues to advance. Asset forfeiture proceedings, coupled with potential testimony requirements in unrelated cases, create mounting pressure. Time is an enemy. Delays erode influence, reduce strategic options, and weaken potential leverage. Yet, in every measured utterance, Combs conveys a sense of control, as though every word is part of a larger play. Analysts suggest that this may be desperation masked as strategy, a calculated attempt to remain relevant in a context increasingly indifferent to past power. The narrative tension is compelling. A man who spent decades controlling narratives now faces the ultimate test: to influence while constrained, to exert power through perception, and to navigate a world that has learned to operate without his explicit direction. His voice, full of urgency yet measured intent, reminds the audience that, even in confinement, influence is not solely determined by physical presence. Every call, every coded message, and every threat carries meaning. The recordings, the leaks, and the documentary together create a portrait of a man balancing on the edge between influence and irrelevance. Combs' continued engagement is as much about survival as it is about legacy, revealing the lengths to which someone accustomed to controlling others will go to retain leverage. The tension between desperation and calculated strategy defines Part 9, a study in power, perception, and the precarious edge between relevance and downfall.
Same kind of extortion that we heard when Cassie took the stand and testified on that airplane ride back from France. Diddy said, "You don't do a freak off, I'm going to release one of the freak off videos that you are profiled in and humiliate."
The decay within Combs' empire predates federal indictments or hidden recordings. The rot stretches back to the foundation of the enterprise, buried under settlements and silenced critics. Kirk Burroughs' testimony about being forcibly removed, left homeless while the empire thrived, exemplifies a pattern insiders have whispered about for decades. Strategic elimination of perceived threats, coercion, and ruthless decision-making created an environment where catastrophe followed, but the man at the center walked away unscathed. When paired with allegations from Steve Otis, who claims Combs invoked a high-profile assassination to silence him, a consistent portrait emerges. Intimidation appears to be standard operating procedure rather than a last resort. Even tragedies tangentially associated with his events, such as incidents at major public gatherings, underscore a pattern of influence where responsibility was rarely assumed, yet power remained firmly in Combs' hands. Civil lawsuits, while not criminal, chronicle decades of strategic, high-stakes manipulation designed to maintain control over narrative, finances, and perception. This cumulative history emphasizes the interplay of legacy, intimidation, and strategic foresight. Combs' empire, though publicly admired, was built as much on fear and calculation as on talent and opportunity. His ability to navigate crises, suppress opposition, and manipulate narrative has allowed him to survive catastrophes that would have destroyed others. But current conditions, legal battles, financial restrictions, and public scrutiny challenge this resilience, exposing vulnerabilities previously hidden behind charisma and authority. The unfolding events underscore a central question: how does a man accustomed to control operate when the structures sustaining that control are compromised? The documentary, civil cases, and leaked recordings collectively highlight the fragility of influence, even as they demonstrate the lasting consequences of strategic ruthlessness. Combs' history is a cautionary tale, illustrating that accumulated power may withstand challenges for decades, but it is never immune to exposure or decay. The complexity of the narrative lies in contrasts. Public perception of invincibility clashes with the realities of prison confinement, financial oversight, and legal jeopardy. Even as the man retains knowledge and leverage, the mechanisms enabling execution of that influence have been compromised. Observers are left to consider whether legacy, cunning, and reputation can substitute for tangible power, and whether the carefully constructed empire can survive both scrutiny and internal decay.